Dear students, welcome and thank you for tuning in. We are continuing our discussion about protein interaction with biomaterials. This is part of the Biomaterials 1 class. We are still talking about adhesion molecules, mainly about integrins family of proteins. We also mentioned multiple times something called the extracellular matrix. Cells inside the human body or inside any organism, they don't live in the vacuum or in liquids. So they have to be living in something called an extracellular matrix, which is a mesh of proteins that consist of the space and the protein fibers. So if you look at this image here, we have an image of cells that living in the extracellular matrix. So if you see all these lines or all these fuzzy structures here, they're all protein fibers and space. Our cells are the darker structures, so those cells. The cells has to attach to the extracellular matrix in order to live and to take their shape and to be functional. Protein fibers and extracellular space constitute the extracellular matrix. Cells attach to the extracellular matrix by the focal adhesion points, and if you remember about the focal adhesion, we said that there are collection of integrins and proteins that facilitate attachment. This is the integrin, multiple integrins in one location in the cellular membrane with the accompanying proteins, peripheral proteins. They can attach and they create the focal adhesion points. It's very important to understand that cells communicate with their outside environment or the surrounding environment using integrins and the receptors. This interaction between integrin and the extracellular matrix and the fibers and the proteins outside the cell transmit information about the spatial mechanical environment in which the cells are living in. Cells are sensitive to the environment they are surrounded with. If you have stiff surrounding, is different from a soft surrounding, and cells will behave differently based on the surrounding. Now, how would they know about this? This is through the attachment and the transmission of information. This transmission happened through the integrins, protein, cytoskeleton. We have our integrin here, we have the proteins, and then the cytoskeleton. Whatever outside the cell, if this is the cell membrane, and this is the outer the cell, this is the extracellular matrix, and this is inside the cell, this is cytoplasm. So what happens is that those integrins will interact with the proteins, peripheral proteins. Those proteins will interact with the actin filaments inside the cytoskeleton filaments, and that's how cells interact and behave and react to the extracellular matrix. One more thing we need to mention is that all the proteins and the fibers in the extracellular matrix are actually made from the cells. So cells create those proteins and secrete them outside the cells, and then they start interacting with those proteins. Just to summarize what an extracellular matrix is, it's a collection of protein fibers and space. Cells have to live in extracellular matrix in order to be functional and healthy, and we know that the cells attach to the extracellular matrix via the focal adhesion points, and the focal adhesion points transmit the information about the spatial mechanical environment the cells live in, and we'll talk more about this spatial mechanical transduction and how that's important. The interaction happen through integrins, protein, and the cytoskeleton connectivity. One of the things, cell sense the spatial. We'll talk a little bit more about the spatial mechanical transduction. So cells will sense the space and the mechanical properties of its behavior by attachment via focal adhesions, which are the integrins, right? Collection of integrins and the accompanying proteins. We have something called spatial and mechanical information. It transmits through the cell by the response of the tensegrity architecture of the cytoskeleton. So anything if this is the cell membrane, this is outside the cell, and this is inside the cell, we have the extracellular matrix and we have the cytoskeleton. So what's going to happen is that anything happens outside or affect them the properties of the material outside will be transmitted through integrins into the interior of the cell, and the cell will behave accordingly. The response of the cytoskeleton initiates a protein signaling process, and that's through phosphorylation. So I would look at phosphorylation like, let's say, a light. If anything happen outside that affects the functional part of the integrin, then inside the inside part we have some kinases. There are enzymes. They just do phosphorylation. So the phosphorus group will start attaching to this location. If a phosphorus group was attached, it means that just like a light, it's just a lid, there's something happening and we need to do something about it from the outside. And there's a lot of regulations about this signaling transduction. We're not going to go into details, but I want to keep you informed that the spatial mechanical or spatial mechanical transduction, signal transduction, is happening through phosphorylation, and that's what we call protein signaling processes, one of the protein signaling processes. I wouldn't stop here, and I will in the coming videos talk more about the focal adhesion points and how the mechanical properties of the material surrounding the cells affect cells behavior.